How exactly did I come across this book? Well, I owned Super Freakonomics, and I decided to take a look at the original when I seen it at a thrift shop for less than the cost of this dollar coin right here, and figured, 50 cents, I gotta snap it up, right? Okay, now this book covers a wide range of topics. Basically, the authors take a look at almost everything. They say everything, but not quite that. Quite a bit. They take a look at everything from an economist standpoint, which leads us to a word of caution, in that you will find at least one thing you disagree with, probably more than that. Again, it's econometrics, which means regression analysis, correlation. Does it lead to causation? Big question, Does the data, if the data is correlated, does that actually cause it, or is it spurious correlation? Again, they look at a number of things. Everything is probably the appropriate term. So we can run into problems where they might have, too many variables in certain stuff they're looking at. I'm not going to go into specifics. I'll let you be the judge of that. One other thing to keep in mind when you're messing around with data is garbage in and garbage out. You put in bad data, you're going to get bad results. For the rest of this review, I'm going to divide this into two categories. First, we're going to go with what I found interesting, and secondly, we're going to go with other stuff. And remember, this covers a wide range of topics. So let's start out with what I found interesting. Information asymmetry. I like that. You're looking at buyer's knowledge, seller's knowledge, and this thing in the middle called a gap. Very interesting stuff. If I had one complaint, I would have wished they had more of that in the book. Another thing I found interesting was the Drug Dealers Inc. section, or I'll call it Drug Dealers Inc., where an undercover grad student, well, not really undercover, gets stuck up giving a survey to a gang. He gets captured by them. Eventually, he gets their trust and keeps track of how they're doing. And then one of the members eventually gives him an accounting ledger with their revenues, expenses, net income. Come to find out that they don't spend as much on guns as most people would think because they get them deeply discounted on the black market. That's an interesting subject to take a look at. Now, the authors go a little bit further and they compare it to, corporate America, because, the drug dealer actually reports to, or the head guy reports to, a gang leader reports to a board of directors. Yes and no. I mean, there's, subtle differences and stuff like that. It is top heavy, where, the lower level, the foot soldiers, the low level workers don't make very much money, and, the big wigs, the top execs make large amounts because they're taking all the risk. But in the gang case, pretty much the foot soldiers are taking all the risk. So, I mean, there's probably some subtle differences you can pick apart. But yeah, it is a business, and it is interesting to see what data they have and how that worked out at the time that they were doing the survey. So that's an interesting part of the book, and definitely something worth taking a look at. Then we shift gears to another subject I found interesting, and that's cheating teachers. Teachers cheating? No way. Before we get into that, there was another interesting thing I found with the $3 incentive. Basically, the $3 fine to parents who would leave their kids late to class. That was tried out in Israel. And that actually was such a small incentive that it encouraged parents to leave their kids late in class because it was cheaper than finding a babysitter. Now let's go back to the cheating teachers part. And how exactly did they catch these cheating teachers on, tests where they were driven to perform and whatever they needed to get their kids' test scores up? Teachers would do that might involve, changing answers that students wrote down, or actually, writing stuff on the thing. Well, come to find out, one way to figure out if they were cheating was to mine the data to catch them. Try to think like a teacher, look for stuff that stands out, where students doing really good 1 year and then regressing the next. Why do bad students do really good 1 year in test scores and then it goes back down to normal? Something that doesn't stand out. The best example I could think of in terms of finding irregularities would be, you know, like credit card fraud and stuff like that, where you're running algorithms to find out if the data makes sense, and if something stands out, you know, you got to look at it. You probably say the same thing with voter fraud too. Now, then they take the cheating and they stretch it a little bit. Okay, we talk about sumo wrestlers, and yeah, the sumo wrestling part was interesting, but you know, you really compare that to teachers, the only thing you can really compare is the cheating portion. Now, they do mine data as well to try to catch them. In other words, they look at bubble matches, which goes like this. You have a 500 wrestler that's on the bubble, and all of a sudden they're winning against plus 500 competition at an 80% plus clip, which statistically they don't do as well when you adjust that when they're wrestling against the same wrestlers and they're not on the bubble, which suggests there may be a quid pro quo. You can take a further look at that for more information. The next thing I found interesting was real estate, and specifically real estate agents getting more money for their house than their clients. And that had something to do with information asymmetry and the gap between the buyer's knowledge and the seller's knowledge. In other words, if they do something about the market, had more information, they'd hold out longer for a better price. And then when they took a deeper look at you know, the agent's commissions and stuff like that, and you see, you know, an extra couple percentage points, they might as well get the sale through because there's no real incentive to sell it for more because of the low percentage of commissions they're getting when you factor in the split and the split with the seller and the split with the company and stuff like that. So I like that section. Now let's take a look at some other stuff. Now the main point before we go into this, the main point that I would take away is don't always trust conventional wisdom, or that's one of the points that the authors hit on. And that's a good point. Now, one topic they like to tackle was the abortion debate, and they like to look at it from an econometric standpoint. And what they basically try to argue is that the crime wave that went away, or crime started decreasing in the 90s, and that was due to abortion being legalized in the 70s and not police on the street. They also take it a little bit further, and they look at the country Romania, where this leader here outlawed abortion in the late 60s, and by the time we got to late 1980s, 1989 specifically, they had a lot of population growth and a larger percentage of criminals than they should have, and it led to unrest, student unrest, not able to find jobs and stuff like that. And eventually it led to him getting ousted and put in front of a firing squad and being replaced. They also take a look at online dating, such as bald guys don't do as well as guys with hair. Another piece of data that stands out in the dating part is that men prefer blondes and college-educated women equally, which they translate to say that, okay, it might be cheaper just to dye your hair blonde than to spend $100,000 on an education. There's also a section on the KKK. They talk about the brief history of it, how it started, the revival of the KKK, with the big movie The Birth of a Nation, where President Woodrow Wilson is quoted. Later on, President Harding becomes a member of the organization. And then they argue that over time, lynchings drop. They show a chart where every decade the number of lynchings dropped, and they argue that was because the fear of lynching actually worked to the point where the KKK was achieving their goals because of fear and fear alone. And then they talk about how it became, on the econometric side, a dues-paying organization, where the guys at the top were making a lot of money or collecting a lot of money from dues and fees and other stuff like that, and then the lower level people were just being taken advantage of. And they get to the point, they discuss a mole named Stetson who joins the group, and he wants to, you know, break their grip on the South, or on government and politics. and he tries everything, and nothing works until he decides to give information to a Superman radio show, where Superman can fight somebody besides Stalin and Hitler. He can fight the KKK, and he gives them, all their passwords and stuff like that. And at that point, their passwords and information are no longer secret, meaning everybody knows about it, and because the information has been shined, the members get upset and they start protesting that it's not such a secret organization, and their kids know about it. It's not as appealing, and that drops the allure of the organization and actually makes it go away, or that's kind of what they argue. Now, eventually, over time, the KKK is still in place, and then David Duke eventually becomes leader. And okay, at this point in time, it's like a big real estate organization, they argue, and he's just collecting a lot of fees. Eventually, he gets in trouble for escaping too much off and has to go away to prison, and that's kind of how that story ends. There's also a section on the parenting, which takes a look at a lot of different data and tries to figure out what is important and what is not important. Lastly, there is this section on names. And to be honest with you, by the time I got to that, I was kind of bored by it. I'm like, don't really think I'm going to learn anything. This is kind of boring, so I kind of skimmed through it, and we'll leave it at that. The important parts of the book are the questions they ask are, how do people act in the real world? And another main point is, don't always trust conventional wisdom or common wisdom. Most of the time, it's probably right, but you gotta, take a look at the underlying and see if that is true. If that's true, then yeah, it's probably right. But if it's not true, then you gotta look at why. One of the downsides, they do look at a lot of stuff where they have too many variables. So some of their arguments may, not be complete because there's too many variables involved in it, but it's interesting from an economics perspective. And one other note. Now, since this is from an economist perspective, they're only looking at it from the economic point of view, which means they're leaving out other disciplines and stuff like that. And that means that a number of the wide range of topics that they tackled could be flawed. And what does that mean? Well, that means they're probably wrong in a number of cases. Nevertheless, they ask a lot of interesting questions, and it makes for a good read. Thank you for watching.